Disclaimer: this story is a fictionalized narrative inspired by true-to-life situations. Names, characters, and events have been altered for privacy and dramatic effect. It is intended for storytelling and entertainment purposes only, not to target, defame, or expose any individual. Listener discretion is advised, as the themes involve marital conflict, infidelity, and emotional tension. Marriage, at its core, is built on the fragile but powerful foundation of trust. For years, I believed mine was unshakable. I had been married to my wife, Elena, for 7 years. We weren't perfect, no marriage truly is, but we had a rhythm, a way of complementing each other that made our home feel safe. I worked in IT, long hours but stable, while she thrived in an office setting, surrounded by colleagues I only knew through passing mentions at the dinner table. She often spoke about the team, sometimes mentioning a joke or a project, but never in ways that raised red flags. To me, they were just names without faces, a part of her world that didn't overlap with mine. Our daily life had a calm consistency. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and she'd join me half asleep but smiling. We shared quick breakfasts, exchanged little updates about work, and made weekend plans that sometimes fell through but always mattered. In my mind, this was stability. And stability was love. I trusted Elena because I never had a reason not to. She was charismatic, warm, and people naturally gravitated toward her. I admired that about her. Even in our disagreements, which were usually about small things like my tendency to forget laundry or her obsession with scrolling through her phone at night, we found ways to laugh about it later. Ours was the kind of relationship friends would describe as solid. Looking back now, I realize that kind of confidence can be blinding. You convince yourself that loyalty is a given, that the person you share your bed with could never cross certain lines. I believe that wholeheartedly. My friends sometimes tease me for being too trusting, saying I'd let anything slide as long as Elena smiled and reassured me. And maybe they were right. But at that time, I saw trust as strength, not weakness. What I didn't realize was how easily trust can become a doorway, one you unknowingly open and invite danger through. I didn't question her when she mentioned coworkers. I didn't probe when she worked late. I thought respecting her space was part of being a good husband. But in doing so, I gave her life compartments I never stepped into, corners I never saw. It all seemed fine, ordinary even, until the day her 2 coworkers showed up at our door. That single moment, what felt like a harmless act of generosity, became the spark that lit a fire I never saw coming. It was a Saturday evening when the knock came at our door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Elena hadn't mentioned plans, so when I opened it, I was surprised to see 2 men standing there with travel bags slung over their shoulders. Both were in their early 30s, dressed casually, looking slightly uncomfortable yet familiar in a way I couldn't place. Before I could even ask, Elena appeared behind me, her expression lighting up with recognition. "These are my coworkers," she said quickly, almost rehearsed. "Mark and Daniel. Remember I mentioned them before?" I nodded, though truthfully, the names didn't ring a bell. Elena continued before I could respond. She explained that their apartment lease had suddenly fallen through, and they needed a place to stay for a little while until they found another option. Her tone was apologetic but expectant, as though she already knew what my answer would be. I hesitated. Our house wasn't small, but it wasn't exactly designed for guests to linger indefinitely. Still, I didn't want to seem rude, especially not to people Elena worked with daily. My instinct to trust her overpowered any hesitation. I forced a smile and told them they were welcome to stay. Mark, the taller of the 2, thanked me warmly. Daniel, quieter and reserved, just nodded with a polite smile. That night, as I helped them settle into the guest room, I told myself this was temporary. A few days, maybe a week at most. People help each other in times of need, that's what decent people do. I reminded myself that Elena had always been generous with her friends, and this was no different. But even then, something in the air shifted. The dynamic in the house had changed in an instant. Dinner that evening was louder than usual, filled with inside jokes and laughter between Elena and her coworkers. They shared stories from the office, names of people I didn't know, events I hadn't been part of. I laughed along where I could, but a subtle divide had already formed. It was as if there was an entire world Elena lived in during the day that had now stepped into our living room, and I was the outsider. Later, when we cleaned up, I mentioned to Elena that it had all happened so fast, the sudden arrival, the arrangement. She brushed it off with her usual charm, saying, "It's just for a short time. You'll barely notice them." But I did notice. I noticed the way her face lit up when they spoke, the ease of her laughter, and the comfort that came too naturally for what I assumed were just coworkers. I noticed how quickly she shifted into their rhythm, as if they had brought a piece of her work life into our home, and I was simply expected to adjust. At the time, I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking. They were just two guys who needed a place to stay. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that by opening the door that evening, I had let something in that would be harder to push out later. The first few days passed quietly enough, though I couldn't deny that the house already felt different. It wasn't about the extra noise or the clutter from having two more people around. It was something harder to explain. Our home had always been a place of calm, a little predictable in its routines, but now it carried a restless energy. Mark was the more outspoken of the two. He made himself comfortable almost immediately, sprawling on the couch, flipping through channels, even helping himself to the fridge. He was the type who filled every silence with a comment or a joke. Daniel, in contrast, was softer in presence, but his quietness didn't make him invisible, it almost made him more noticeable. He watched, listened, and when he did speak, it was usually directed at Elena, in tones that carried familiarity. It was Elena herself who changed most of all. She seemed livelier, more animated, as if their presence unlocked a side of her I didn't usually see at home. She started dressing differently, even on weekends, casual but more put together, makeup she normally reserved for office days. When I teased her about it one morning, she laughed it off and said, "I just don't want to look sloppy around guests." It sounded reasonable, but it nagged at me anyway. Meals, once our shared time of day, now revolved around stories from their workplace. They spoke a language of inside jokes and shared frustrations that left me feeling like an outsider in my own dining room. I tried to join in, asked questions here and there, but often my contributions fell flat. I was the listener, not the participant. Elena didn't seem to notice, or maybe she chose not to. At night, when I expected to have her to myself, things felt different too. She stayed up later, lingering in the living room with them, claiming they were just talking about work stuff. I'd go to bed alone more often than not, lying awake and telling myself this was temporary, that I was overthinking. But in the silence of those nights, doubts crept in. Even small things bothered me. Mark casually bringing laundry into our washer without asking, Daniel spending long stretches in the kitchen with Elena while she cooked. I told myself it was harmless, but each little detail chipped away at the sense of ease I once had. One evening, as I passed the hallway, I caught the faint sound of laughter coming from the guest room. Elena's laugh. It was quiet, different from the way she laughed with me, more hushed, more intimate somehow. I froze outside the door for a moment, listening, before forcing myself to walk away. My chest felt tight, though I had no evidence of anything concrete. The house was no longer just ours. It was shared space, and with every passing day, I couldn't shake the feeling that my role inside it was shrinking. The first time I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. It was past midnight, the house was quiet, and I woke up to the faint sound of voices. At first, I told myself it was the TV left on, but as I listened more closely, I recognized the hushed tone of Elena's voice. She was speaking softly, too softly, like she didn't want to be heard. Another voice, deeper, male, answered. I lay there for a moment, frozen. My mind rushed to find an innocent explanation. Maybe they couldn't sleep, maybe it was work talk. I tried to convince myself there was nothing sinister about it. But something in the tone, the secrecy, the muffled laughter that followed, told me otherwise. I got out of bed quietly and walked to the hallway. The voices grew clearer, coming from the living room. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Daniel's voice, calm and deliberate, and Elena's soft responses, almost playful. My stomach tightened. I wanted to step into the room, to make my presence known, but something held me back. Fear, maybe. Fear of confirming what I already suspected. Instead, I returned to bed, lying awake until the first light of morning seeped through the curtains. The following days, the pattern continued. I'd wake in the middle of the night, find the other side of the bed empty, and hear the same low voices drifting down the hallway. When I confronted Elena casually, asking why she stayed up so late, she brushed it off. "We were just talking," she said with a shrug. "They're stressed about their apartment situation, that's all." Her explanation was simple, harmless even, but her eyes didn't meet mine when she said it. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to hold on to the trust that had defined our marriage. But every night that passed chipped away at it. Her laughter sounded different in the dark, like it belonged to someone else, not the woman I had shared years of my life with. One night, I mustered the courage to ask her directly, "Why do you spend so much time with them? Don't you think it looks strange?" I tried to keep my tone calm, but the weight behind the words betrayed me. She sighed, annoyed, and said, "You're overreacting. They're my coworkers, not strangers. Don't make this into something it's not." Her defensiveness stung more than her words. I wanted reassurance, something solid to hold on to, but instead I was left with doubt and a hollow ache in my chest. Lying awake after she fell asleep beside me, I couldn't shake the thought, if there was truly nothing to hide, why did it always feel like it was happening behind closed doors, in whispers meant for anyone but me? The silence that followed those nights was worse than the whispers themselves. It was the silence of a man slowly losing grip on the certainty he once thought unshakable. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They started small, subtle shifts in routine that could almost be dismissed if I wasn't already on edge. One afternoon, I went to grab a jacket from our bedroom and noticed something odd, a men's wristwatch sitting on the dresser. It wasn't mine. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand, and felt my stomach tighten. When I asked Elena about it later, she barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, that must be Daniel's," she said casually. "He must have left it while we were talking in here earlier." Her tone was smooth, almost rehearsed, but the explanation didn't sit right. Why had they been in our bedroom? Another time, I went to do laundry and found a pair of men's socks mixed in with our clothes. Again, not mine. I stood there staring at them, my mind racing. Elena had always been meticulous about keeping our things separate from guests. When I brought it up, she laughed lightly and told me I was acting strange. "They probably just tossed it in by mistake," she said. "Stop worrying so much." But I couldn't stop. Each small discovery built upon the last, layering suspicion over suspicion. It wasn't just physical objects, it was her behavior too. She guarded her phone like never before. Where she once left it on the kitchen counter without a thought, now it rarely left her hand. If a message came in, she angled the screen away from me, her thumb moving quickly across the glass. When I asked who she was texting, she'd shrug and say, "Just work stuff." I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but every time I tried, I hesitated. A part of me was afraid of being wrong, of damaging our marriage with accusations I couldn't yet prove. Another part of me feared the opposite, that I wasn't wrong at all, and by asking directly, I'd open a door I couldn't close. The tension began eating at me. I found myself watching her closely, analyzing her words, her tone, the way her eyes shifted when she answered my questions. She seemed distracted, distant, like she was physically present but mentally elsewhere. The warmth we once shared felt replaced with a guardedness I didn't recognize. One evening, as I passed the guest room, I noticed the door was cracked open. Inside, I saw Daniel sitting on the edge of the bed, Elena beside him. They weren't touching, but their posture, their closeness, it was too familiar, too intimate for mere coworkers. Before they noticed me, I walked away, my heart pounding. I told myself again and again that maybe I was overthinking, maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. But deep down, I knew better. Trust doesn't unravel overnight. It frays slowly, thread by thread, until one day you look down and realize you're holding nothing at all. The night everything shifted began like any other. Dinner had been loud with conversation between Elena and her coworkers, laughter bouncing around the table in a way that left me silent. I excused myself early, retreating to the bedroom under the guise of exhaustion, but truthfully, I just wanted the noise to stop. I lay there in the dark, listening to the muffled voices from the living room, until finally, the house grew quiet. I don't know what made me get up that night, instinct, perhaps, or simply the weight of too many unanswered questions, but I rose and walked softly down the hall. As I approached the kitchen, I saw the dim glow of light spilling across the floor. My chest tightened. When I stepped closer, I froze. Elena stood near the counter, her body angled toward Daniel. They weren't kissing, but they didn't have to be. The way she leaned in, the softness in her eyes, the subtle touch of his hand brushing against hers, it was intimacy, plain and undeniable. A kind of closeness that should have belonged only to us. I must have made a sound because Elena's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Daniel quickly pulled his hand back, muttering something under his breath before retreating toward the guest room. Elena stayed rooted where she was, guilt written across her face even as she struggled to compose herself. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "You're imagining things. He was just thanking me for everything, that's all." But the excuse was flimsy, her voice uneven. I stared at her, waiting for honesty, but all she offered was deflection. "You're paranoid," she added. "You're making this into something it isn't." I wanted to believe her, to cling to the idea that I was wrong, but the image of their closeness was burned into me. No explanation could erase it. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse her of betrayal outright. Instead, I withdrew into silence, the kind that spoke louder than anger. That night, I lay in bed while she pretended to sleep beside me, both of us wide awake in the dark. From then on, I started watching more closely. I noticed the way she avoided my gaze, the way conversations between us became shorter, thinner, as if she was guarding her words. I began keeping mental notes of every odd detail, every unexplained absence, every glance that lingered too long. Trust had shattered, and in its place grew a cold determination. If she wouldn't give me the truth, I would find it myself. The breaking point wasn't just that night in the kitchen, it was the realization that my marriage had already shifted into something unrecognizable. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I had become a man searching for proof of what his heart already knew. Confrontation was never my style, but there comes a point where silence weighs more than words. After nights of listening to whispers, catching half-seen moments, and drowning in suspicion, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The house that once felt like mine now felt like a stage where I was the only one not in on the script. It happened on a Sunday morning. The air was heavy with that tense quiet that follows sleepless nights. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee I barely touched. Elena came in, her hair damp from the shower, wearing a loose shirt that wasn't hers. I knew because I'd never seen it before. My pulse quickened. "Elena," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "we need to talk." She froze for a moment before forcing a smile. "About what?" "About everything. About late nights, about Daniel, about what I've seen." Her face changed then, the mask slipping just enough for me to catch the flicker of panic in her eyes. She tried to deflect at first, laughing lightly, insisting I was overthinking, blaming stress for her distance. But I didn't let her. I repeated what I'd seen. The late-night conversations, the touch in the kitchen, the way she pulled away from me more with each passing day. Finally, she stopped pretending. Her shoulders slumped, and she whispered, "It wasn't what you think." "Then what was it?" I pressed. She hesitated, tears welling up. It went too far. I let lines blur that shouldn't have. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I liked the attention. I liked feeling wanted. Her words cut through me deeper than shouting ever could. She didn't outright admit to sleeping with him, but she didn't deny the intimacy either. The betrayal was in her tone, in the way she spoke of craving something outside of us. When I asked about Mark, she shook her head quickly. No, it was only Daniel, as if narrowing the betrayal would lessen the weight of it. But the damage was done. The confrontation ended with silence, not resolution. Daniel and Mark left that very afternoon, their departure abrupt and awkward. They avoided my eyes as they carried their bags out the door, Elena standing in the hallway, her face pale and unreadable. No words of apology, no promises of repair, just a hollow emptiness that settled into the walls of our home. That evening, the house was quiet again for the first time in weeks, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. The truth was out, raw and ugly, but it didn't bring clarity. It only left me with the realization that the woman I trusted most had crossed a line she could never fully step back from. And as I sat there in that silence, I wondered, was the truth really exposed, or had I only been given the pieces she was willing to admit? The day after Mark and Daniel left, the house felt emptier than ever before. I had thought their departure might bring me relief, that without their presence the tension would ease, but instead it left behind a silence that echoed with every unanswered question. It was as though their absence exposed the raw wound beneath, forcing us to face what we had been avoiding. Elena tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. She made breakfast, cleaned the living room, even asked if I wanted to watch a movie that night. But her efforts felt forced, artificial, like she was trying to patch a sinking boat with tape. I responded with short words, unable to summon the warmth I once gave so freely. Every glance at her face reminded me of the admission she had made, that she had liked the attention, that she had let boundaries slip. In the days that followed, I wrestled with myself. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe her when she insisted it hadn't gone further, that it was just emotional, not physical. Another part of me knew that betrayal isn't measured only by actions, but also by intentions, by the moments of choice when she could have said no but didn't. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply stitch itself back together. Friends I confided in gave me conflicting advice. Some told me to leave, that once someone crosses that line, they'll cross it again. Others urged me to try and rebuild, to think of the years we had shared, the life we had built. Their words only added to the storm already raging in my mind. At night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering who I had become. I wasn't the husband who trusted blindly anymore. I wasn't the man who believed his marriage was unshakable. I was someone else now, someone harder, quieter, but also more aware. Eventually, Elena broke down. One evening, she sat across from me at the table, tears streaming down her face. She begged me to give her another chance, swearing she would never let something like this happen again. Her words were desperate, heavy with regret. For a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the whispers in the night, the touch in the kitchen, the way she had chosen lies over truth until there was no other choice. The question wasn't whether she wanted to stay, it was whether I could ever see her the same way again. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe we'll try to rebuild, maybe we'll part ways. What I do know is that the man I was before, the one who thought trust was unshakable, is gone. Looking back, I can't help but think of the irony. All I did was open the door one evening, acting out of kindness and trust. I let them in, thinking it was the right thing to do. But in the end, what I truly let in was something far more dangerous, something that cost me more than I ever imagined. 2.